I still remember the moment Sister Catherine's story first reached me. It felt less like hearing news and more like being invited into a sacred mystery. The 25th of October 2025 began as an ordinary morning for her, a quiet convent tucked in the hills of Montana, the smell of bread and coffee in the air, prayers whispered in candlelight. But by sunset, her heart had stopped beating, and she crossed the threshold between time and eternity. Isn't it remarkable how, in a single moment, everything we think we know about life can change? Catherine said that as her body lay still, her soul was lifted into a light brighter than the sun, yet soft as mercy. There she met Jesus, not as an image in a stained glass window, but as a living presence whose eyes held both compassion and authority. He called her by name, as if she were the only soul in the universe. And he said, "Time is almost over. The world is entering the days the prophets feared. Go back and tell them." Imagine being told that, sent back to a world that had already said its goodbyes, carrying a message that would shake the foundations of comfort and faith. She saw visions of what was to come, what she called 5 places of death, not just locations on a map, but symbols of where humanity puts its trust instead of in God. Yet, what struck me most was not the warning, it was the love behind it. Jesus didn't send her back to terrify people, he sent her back to awaken them. Sometimes God interrupts our normal, everyday rhythm to remind us that eternity is closer than we think. Like Catherine, maybe we've all had moments when the light breaks through our ordinary routine and God whispers, "There's more to your story." The truth is, he still speaks. He still calls ordinary people, nuns, workers, students, you and me, to stand in the gap, to remind a weary world that hope is not gone. Her testimony isn't just about the end times, it's about a beginning, a new urgency to live with purpose, to love deeply, to listen closely. Because if he could call her back from the edge of death, imagine what he can resurrect in your life today. When God sends you back, it's because there's still something left for you to do. When Sister Catherine opened her eyes again, 3 days after being declared gone, the world looked the same, but she was not the same. She said it felt like waking up in a world she no longer belonged to, yet one she was called to save. The doctors couldn't explain it. The sisters in her convent wept with awe and confusion. But Catherine knew she had been sent back on assignment. "Tell them," Jesus had said. "Warn them. What I showed you is not a symbol. It is real." You see, sometimes God doesn't speak in riddles, he speaks in clarity. He warns us because he loves us. He gives us glimpses of what's coming, not to frighten us, but to prepare us. And that's what burned inside her heart, this undeniable fire to speak truth while there was still time. She said that every breath she took felt borrowed, every heartbeat like a reminder. You were brought back for a reason. How many times has God spared you, given you another chance? Not because you deserved it, but because there's something only you can do. Some of you are still here, not by accident, but by assignment. Catherine didn't return to comfort, she returned to burden. Imagine carrying a message that could save millions, yet knowing few would believe you. She was mocked, misunderstood, even accused of seeking attention. But when you've seen eternity, you can't live for applause anymore. She would often whisper, "Obedience is heavier than fear." That line still moves me. Because we all face moments where doing what's right costs us something, our pride, our comfort, our approval. Yet, like Catherine, we must speak even when it shakes us, act even when it costs us, trust even when it's lonely. She knew that obedience might not make her popular, but it would make her useful to heaven. That's the kind of courage God is calling us to today. The truth is, we're all given warnings in our own way, nudges from the Spirit, dreams, convictions, moments of clarity. The question isn't whether God is speaking, it's whether we're listening. Catherine's return reminds us that divine assignments often come wrapped in discomfort. But just like her, when we obey, when we choose purpose over fear, God's hand covers us. He leads, He protects, He provides. You may not have stood before Jesus in a blinding light, but He's still calling you to wake up, to speak out, to live as though eternity is near. Because it is. When Sister Catherine spoke about the first place Jesus showed her, her voice trembled not with fear, but with the weight of what she had seen. He took me high above the earth, she said, and I saw the land of Jerusalem spread out beneath me, so beautiful, yet trembling under a shadow. Armies surrounded the holy city like vultures circling their prey. The sky itself seemed to groan as the world held its breath. Jesus' voice came to her calm, firm, filled with sorrow. When you see the abomination standing in the holy place, those in Judea must flee to the mountains. He didn't say to think about it. He didn't say to pray about it. He said flee immediately, because there are moments when hesitation can cost your life. I think about that often, how obedience in the small things prepares us for obedience in the urgent ones. We can't wait until the storm hits to learn how to listen. We have to train our hearts now, in the quiet places, to recognize His voice when everything shakes. Catherine described the chaos, the earthquakes that tore open the ground, the fire that fell from the sky, the darkness that swallowed cities whole. But amid the terror, she saw light. In the remote wilderness, small groups of believers had obeyed instantly. They left behind their possessions, their comfort, their certainty, and found angels waiting in the shadows, feeding them, protecting them, guiding them like the Israelites in the desert. That image moves me deeply. Heaven meeting obedience with provision. Sometimes God's safest places don't look safe at all. They're caves, deserts, hidden paths that only faith can see. We often pray, Lord, protect me from trouble, but God says, obey me through trouble. Maybe you've been standing on the edge of a decision, hearing that still small voice say, go now. Don't look back. You might not understand why, but obedience rarely makes sense until afterward. The people in Catherine's vision who delayed, who went back for what they couldn't bear to lose, were lost in the storm. But those who ran when He said run found life in the wilderness. I've learned that divine protection is never about geography, it's about alignment. It's not where you stand, it's who you're standing with. God still calls His people to flee from danger, not out of fear, but into purpose. And when you trust His direction, even the mountains will open their arms to receive you. When Sister Catherine described her second vision, her eyes filled with both awe and grief. He showed me the cities, she said softly, the towers of glass and steel that touch the sky, the lights that never go out, the noise that never sleeps. New York, London, Tokyo, Dubai, the places humanity calls its greatest achievements. But in the vision, those bright lights began to flicker. The screens went dark. The sound of traffic and laughter faded into silence. Then chaos. Systems failed, markets crashed, and people who once ruled empires of wealth were suddenly powerless in the dark. Jesus' voice broke through the vision like thunder. This is the second place of death where people trust in their own strength more than mine. I've often thought about that, how easy it is to build our own Babylons. We might not live in skyscrapers, but we build them in our hearts, towers of pride, control, comfort. We say, I've got this, I've saved enough, I've planned enough. But when the foundation isn't God, it only takes one storm to reveal how fragile it all is. Catherine saw what happens when the systems we trust collapse, how panic spreads faster than any virus, how fear consumes even the strongest minds. Yet amid the ruin she saw something else, small lights glowing in the darkness. Families who had listened to God's quiet whisper months earlier, who had left the city life behind when it made no sense. They moved to rural places, obeying a nudge they couldn't explain, and when the world went dark, they had peace. Provision found them in places where logic said it couldn't. Isn't that just like God? When everything man builds crumbles, His care still stands. It reminded me of a man I met years ago, a successful banker who left his career to run a small farm after feeling led by God. People thought he'd lost his mind. But when the pandemic came, his simple life became his sanctuary. He told me, "Joel, obedience made no sense until it was the only thing that made sense." I think that's the heart of this warning, not fear of collapse, but faith in preparation. God isn't telling us to abandon cities. He's asking us to abandon false security. Maybe He's calling you to simplify, to step away from something that looks powerful but pulls you away from Him. Don't wait until the lights go out to look for the true source of light. When the world's systems fail, those who've trusted in God will still stand. Because when He's your foundation, no darkness can take your peace. When Sister Catherine began describing her third vision, her tone changed. It wasn't just sorrow anymore. It was heartbreak mixed with divine disappointment. "He took me underground," she said, "to places built by human hands, where people thought they could outsmart the storm." She saw the world's elite hiding in vast bunkers carved into the earth walls of steel, corridors lined with gold, stocked with every luxury money could buy. They had air systems, years of food, digital walls of defense. They believed they had found their salvation beneath the surface. But in the vision, those mighty fortresses began to fail. Power flickered, oxygen turned stale, and the silence of isolation became their loudest torment. Jesus said, "This is the third place of death, the place where man trusts in himself more than in me." I've often thought about that. How many of us have our own bunkers? We may not live underground, but we build walls around our hearts, walls of pride, self-reliance, control. We say, "I can handle it. I've got a plan. I don't need help." But when the pressure rises and life shuts down our systems, we discover that no fortress is strong enough without God at the foundation. Catherine said the saddest part wasn't the collapse of the bunkers, it was the emptiness inside them. Without the presence of God, even the safest place became a prison. People turned on each other, consumed by fear and hopelessness. Isn't that what happens when we live cut off from the source of life? We may survive physically, but our souls starve in the dark. I remember a man who told me, "Joel, I built my dream house, but when I lost my peace, it felt like a cage." That's what Jesus was showing. Catherine's safety without surrender is an illusion. True refuge isn't found in what we build, it's found in who we trust. God isn't against preparation, He's against pride. You can plan wisely and still depend completely on Him. Because the truth is, He doesn't want us living underground in fear, He wants us standing above ground in faith. So, if you've been building walls instead of altars, if you've been trusting your own plans more than His promises, maybe this is your moment to come out of the bunker. Because the safest place in the world isn't hidden under the earth, it's hidden in His presence. When Sister Catherine described her fourth vision, the room seemed to grow still. "He showed me great centers rising in every city," she said, "places where crowds lined up, smiling, thinking they were stepping into a brighter future. Giant screens flashed promises of security, one ID for all, access made easy, safety for your family. It looked like progress, but beneath the polish was a trap." Jesus said, "This is the fourth place of death where the mark of the beast will be given." Catherine saw families torn apart, some saying yes out of fear, others standing firm in faith. Those who accepted the mark were promised food and stability, yet lost something priceless, their connection to God Himself. The moment they bowed to that system, their spirits dimmed like candles blown out. It makes you think, doesn't it? How many times does the world offer us security at the price of our souls? We may not see a physical mark yet, but every day we face smaller versions of that same choice. Will we compromise truth to fit in, or trust God when obedience costs us? I've met people who said, "Joel, I just did what everyone else was doing. It seemed harmless." But what seems harmless in the world's eyes can be deadly in God's. Catherine said that those who refused the mark were cut off from everything: no jobs, no food, no safety, yet she saw light shining over them in the wilderness. Angels brought them bread, water flowed from stones, and their faith became their provision. That image moves me deeply. Because when you lose the world but gain God's presence, you haven't lost, you've won everything that matters. I think about Daniel in Babylon. They changed his name, his language, his home, but they couldn't change his heart. When everyone else bowed, he stood. And because he stood, God stood with him. Friend, there's a day coming when faith will cost more than words. But don't be afraid, God's power always meets obedience. The same angels who fed Elijah will feed you. The same God who sustained Israel in the desert still knows how to make manna fall. So when the world says, compromise or starve, lift your head and say, I've already been marked by grace, by faith, by the hand of the living God. The safest place to stand is always where He stands. When Sister Catherine described her fifth vision, her voice grew quiet, almost reverent. He took me to the edge of the sea, she said, and I saw the waters begin to roar. The coastlines of the world, New York, Miami, Sydney, Hong Kong, stood glittering beneath the sun one moment, and the next they trembled as the deep began to rise. The waves weren't gentle this time. They towered like mountains, swallowing cities whole. Entire regions vanished beneath the rushing tide. And in that moment, Jesus' voice broke through the chaos. This is the fifth place of death, the coastal regions. When the great shaking comes, the sea will no longer know its boundaries. Catherine said she understood then that these places were not just physical locations, but symbols of human pride, the edges of the world where people had built their kingdoms closest to the water, worshiping beauty, wealth, and pleasure instead of God. I think about that often, how easy it is to live close to danger because it looks beautiful. We build our dreams by the shorelines of comfort, not realizing how quickly tides can turn. Maybe that's why God still calls people to move, not always physically, but spiritually, to higher ground. I've met people who said, Joel, I felt something in my spirit telling me to change, to leave a place, to shift direction. And later they realized God had been sparing them from a storm they couldn't see. Catherine said some families in her vision listened to those divine nudges. They left their seaside homes before the waves came, guided not by logic but by obedience. When the floods swept through, they were safe inland, carried by faith more than foresight. That's what God does. He warns before He shakes. He whispers before He roars. Maybe right now, He's calling you to step away from something that looks stable but isn't safe. Don't wait for the waters to rise to decide where your trust lies. The truth is, the coast isn't just a place, it's a posture of the heart. It's living close to the world's edge, where temptation sparkles and comfort feels like security. But faith calls us higher, to the mountains of surrender, to the altitudes of trust. And when you live there, even when the seas roar and the earth quakes, you'll find peace that no storm can take away. Because the safest place to stand isn't on the shore, it's in His will. When Sister Catherine spoke about her final vision, her voice trembled not from fear, but from the awe of what she had seen. He showed me the judgment, she said quietly, not of unbelievers, but of believers. She found herself standing before a vast sea of souls, millions upon millions gathered before the throne of Christ. There was no noise, no excuses, just truth, laid bare in the light of eternity. She said what broke her heart most was this: many of those standing there had called themselves Christians. They had sung the songs, attended the services, even served in ministry. Yet when their lives were weighed, their hands were empty. Not because they hated Jesus, but because they ignored his voice when it mattered most. They had loved comfort more than calling, routine more than revelation. That scene has never left me. It makes me ask myself, and I'll ask you too, what are we building our lives on? Comfort or conviction? Routine or relationship? Catherine said she saw pastors who had spent years preaching success but never surrender, people who had promised their flocks peace when God was warning them to prepare, families who mocked the idea of divine warnings, who said, God would never ask that of us, only to realize too late that obedience had been the test all along. I think about how easy it is to fall into that trap, to confuse being busy for God with being close to God. You can serve in the temple and still miss his voice if your heart is not surrendered. I once met a man who told me, Joel, I spent my life chasing blessings, but I never stopped long enough to ask the blesser what he wanted. That's what Catherine saw that day, lives full of activity but empty of obedience. But here's the good news. God doesn't show us these things to condemn us, he shows them to correct us. Today, while we still breathe, grace still speaks. You don't have to stand before him one day wishing you had listened. You can listen now. You can choose to act when he whispers, to move when he calls, to let go when he says, trust me. The day of accountability isn't meant to scare you, it's meant to awaken you. Because when your story is told in heaven, it won't be measured by how comfortable you were, but by how courageous you were when he called. Don't wait for eternity to realize that obedience is the greatest act of worship. When Sister Catherine spoke of her final vision, there was light in her eyes, soft, steady, like someone who had glimpsed hope at the edge of despair. After the judgment, she said, he showed me the faithful ones, the remnant who had listened. She saw them scattered across the earth, small in number, but radiant in spirit. They weren't hiding in fear, they were resting in peace. Families who had left behind big homes and busy cities, who had traded comfort for calling. Some lived in humble cabins, others in tents tucked away in mountain valleys. But wherever they were, there was something extraordinary about them, an atmosphere of divine provision. Angels surrounded them, unseen but present. Food appeared when there was none. Warmth came when the cold pressed in. They lacked everything the world prized, yet they carried everything the world had lost: peace, purpose, and joy. That image moves me deeply, because it reminds me that true safety isn't found in what you own, but in who you trust. These people had chosen obedience over abundance, and God turned their simplicity into sanctuary. I've met people like that, those who seem to have so little, yet live as if they possess everything. They don't panic when the world shakes, they rest because their foundation never moves. I think that's what Jesus meant when he said true preparation is spiritual, not physical. It's not about how much you've stored up, it's about how much faith you've built up. You can have shelves full of supplies and still be empty inside. Or you can have nothing but trust and watch heaven open to meet your need. I remember once walking through a poor village overseas. The people had little, but their smiles lit up the dusty roads. A woman offered me a cup of tea from her last pot, and she said, "Pastor, I have learned that when God is with you, you always have enough." That's the spirit of the remnant. The world calls it foolish, but heaven calls it faith. Catherine said their children sang in the wilderness as if the world had never known sorrow. That's what obedience does. It passes peace down like an inheritance. And maybe that's what God is inviting you to today, not to run from fear, but to rise in faith, to simplify, to listen, to let go of what weighs you down so you can hold on to what will never fade. Because in the end, the safest place to live isn't a hidden valley or a guarded shelter, it's right in the center of His will. When Sister Catherine reached the end of her testimony, there was no fear in her voice, only urgency wrapped in grace. "He told me," she said softly, "that the time is shorter than anyone thinks. Not years, months." You could feel the weight of those words. Jesus wasn't calling her to spread panic, but purpose to wake hearts before the shaking began. He said, "Tell them no human system can save them. No wealth, no wall, no wisdom will stand. Only those who hide in me will endure." That's not just a warning, it's an invitation. Sometimes God shakes what's temporary so we'll grab hold of what's eternal. Catherine said she felt His love pressing into her spirit, fierce, protective, like a father shouting for his children to come inside before the storm hits. I think that's how God speaks to us too. Not to scare us, but to save us. To pull us out of distractions, out of fear, out of the illusion that tomorrow is guaranteed. He's saying, "Come back to me. Let go of what can't last. Trust what can never fail." Maybe you've felt that tug lately, a restlessness in your heart, a quiet voice saying, "It's time." That's not coincidence, that's calling. We're living in days where comfort won't carry us, only conviction will. You can have the strongest shelter, the biggest plans, the safest life, but if Jesus isn't your foundation, the storm will find its way in. But here's the promise: if He is your foundation, no storm can shake you. Catherine said she saw small groups of believers praying together, not out of fear, but out of faith, standing shoulder to shoulder, united by love and truth. That's what the world needs now, not louder voices of panic, but deeper roots of prayer. I believe this is a season of decision. Every heart is being called to choose fear or faith, comfort or courage, distraction or devotion. The time of preparation is ending, and the hour of testing is near. But don't let that frighten you, let it focus you. God isn't looking for the perfect, He's looking for the willing. For people who will say, "Lord, I don't know what's coming, but I know You'll be with me." Because when the world begins to tremble, those who trust in Him will stand like unshakable trees, rooted in eternal soil. The message is simple, but it's everything. Turn to Him now, and you'll never be swept away.